Okay, so in the last video, what we did is we were able to track which letters are being clicked on and combine it into a single string. And that string gets displayed here. Now what we also need to do is we need to track those letters so as that if it turns out that when you right click and you have a correct word, it then populates up here. Well, each of these individually have their own text object, their own text mesh. So that means every time we click on a letter, we have to store it, but not display it right away. So we need a means of storing that information so we can then transfer it to these individual text mesh objects. So how do we do that? We need to create two more variables. So in the GM script, what we're going to do, and don't worry too much about why, but up here, put using system.collections.generic. That is required if you want to use what's known as a list variable. So, whereas this string variable has a single value, okay, a list variable will have multiple values, and then you just say at which value the variable is using at any given time. So rather than me explain more, let me put up the list variable, and then I can explain it because it'll be easier to see when you look at. So I copied it over here because list variables can be, I don't want to say tricky, but they're particular. Okay, so first the word list, declaring that it's a list. What type? It's a string. This is the name of the variable. I'm calling it select letter because it's going to track which letters have been selected. Equals new list string with parentheses and then a bracket. And within the brackets is where we're going to store the values. Now you can either put in a statement that declares how many values this is going to have, or you can just put in some placeholder values. We're just going to do that for simplicity's sake. So quotation marks and then a comma, quotation marks and a comma. So that's two sets of quotation marks. And so it's not the single, it's the double quotation mark. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're carving out 7 positions. There's 8, but we're going to use 7 of them, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, so what we said is that you can use a list to store multiple values. You can write to the list, and then you can read from the list. So that's what we're going to do. Every time you click on a letter, you're going to write to this list, okay? And then when the word is correct, and then you have to transfer these values to the letters, the text meshes, then you're going to read from the list. So you're going to write to as you're clicking, and then read from when it's been confirmed. So that means we need to also track which letter we're on, because each one of these have a position. This is a 0 position. Yeah, I know. I don't like it either, but that's how programming works. The first position is the 0 position. So what we'll probably do is we'll skip that one. We'll probably just write to the first, second, third, fourth. That's why I said we're using 7, even though there's 8. So this is position 0, this is position 1, this is position 2, and so on and so forth. You'll see how that comes into play in just a minute. So, public int, and we'll call this letter num, as in which letter? Well, letter num is fine. And it starts off at 0. So, since we need both these variables to be accessible in this script, we need to make them both static. I just didn't want to drop all that coding in at once. I wanted to break down how a list works before I started putting this other stuff in front of it. Okay, so we now have our list, which is basically a repository. So we have a list that we're going to write to and then read from. And then we have this to let us know which position we are. Are we on the first position? Are we in the second? Are we in the third? So on and so forth. So almost done already. So in the click control, we already have the code that says, okay, when the object is clicked on, do some stuff. Well, we're already grabbing the letter. We're grabbing it, as we said, from the text mesh component. So it's just a matter of dropping that into these positions. So when the mouse has been clicked on a letter object, we need gm script dot letter number plus equals 1. So it's been increased by 1. Starts off at 0. You click your first letter, it should be 1. Click on your second letter, it should be equal to 2. That is, letter num should be equal to 2. And then what we want to do is we then want to take that other variable that we just created, and it was selected letter, and you put it in brackets. We'll drop in letter num. Oops, sorry. gm script dot letter num is equal, and I'll summarize this because it's probably going to start looking kind of crazy. Oops. Okay. So it's a lot to look at, but what we're saying is this new list, we have to say which position we're looking at. Are we looking at position 1, position 2, position 3? Well, since we're going to be incrementing, we need to use the variable. So as this increases, that means this is increasing because it's the same variable. Well, what do we want that position to be equal to? We want it to be equal to the text that you're clicking on. So I can't really give much of a better explanation than that, unfortunately. Now, how do we know that it's working? Well, not a great way, because we'd have to be referring out to the list, so it's probably just best that we try to put the final version in. And that is when you right-click, okay, we said that when you right-click, we do a word check, and we put the information into the debug log. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually write to these, okay? But to write to them, a couple ways to do this. You can attach a script to each letter, which is not that great. Or what you can do is you can simply make the GM object be aware of them. That's probably the better way to go about it. So that means we need some more transfer objects. Public transform again, they transform because they're objects. Okay. So we save this, and just like we did with this one here, we're just going to drag and drop the objects onto it. So there's letter 1, 2, 3. So it's letter 1, letter 2. Whoops, sorry, I dragged the wrong one. It's letter 1, and letter 2. So letter 1, and letter 2. If you want to rename them, that's great. I just didn't want to jump ahead and do that yet, just in case I decided to rename them. So for the moment, You can leave it as it is or rename it if you want to. Okay, so now that these have been declared and we've dragged and dropped the corresponding letter objects, that means once again the GM object is now aware of these and can modify them. So now it's just a matter of taking these and putting it to here. So letter 1 should be equal to position 1. Like I said, we're going to skip position 0. Letter 2 should be equal to position 2. Letter 3 should be equal to position 3 if the word is correct. So that's why we do it in here, where we said, okay, the word is correct. So what would that look like? It would look like this. So that variable, letter 1, again, is referring to the text mesh, or the object with the text mesh. So we want to modify exactly that. So get component text mesh dot text is going to be equal to is it select letter? Yes, select letter is the list. And this is how you do it. That's how you say which position you're looking at. So you're saying, okay, here is the variable. Well, which value? The one in the 1 position. Because again, this is the 0 position. This is the 1 position. If you want to use the 0 position, that's absolutely your choice. I think it just gets a little bit messy. And now it's just kind of rinse and repeat. Letter 2 is second. And letter 3 is the third. So again, this variable refers to an object that has a text mesh. So we're modifying that text mesh and we're having it set to the value that we've written to here. So again, like I said at the top of the video, we're going to write to this string as we're clicking on the letters. And then when we right click, we're going to read from it and bring those values into these. I believe that should do it. Don't mind the error at the bottom. I actually had to make a splice because I made a mistake. So W-I-N, right click, and there you go. So just like that, we've added another major piece of functionality. Now, just as we mentioned in the last video, the major limitation is still you've hard-coded precisely 2 correct answers. So we're going to do another video where we show how to have this, rather than being 1 fixed right answer, to having multiple. And I'm thinking that we're probably going to use more of this. We're going to probably create more lists. And what's going to happen is the lists will store the correct answers. So it's going to build on this idea of creating a list. So we'll probably have a 3-letter list variable and a 4-letter list variable, and also a 5 and a 6, and however many you want to go up to. But as you can see, that did work. So I think that should do it for this video, because like I said, I'm really trying to concentrate. Each video should be just 1 piece of functionality. So that should do it then.